Hey, I'm still Jesse. Nothing's changed. Let's have a devotion. We're in Exodus chapter 27, and I'm going to go through some of the prescriptions for the altar and the courtyard and this lampstand oil that's all given in Exodus 27. We'll talk about why it's prescribed and the ultimate purpose of it. In this chapter, you're going to see the tabernacle given a name that's profound and significant. It's a name that's going to be used more often to describe the tabernacle moving forward through the story of the Exodus canonically. And also, I've got a quick story to tell you from our pig roast that we just had at my house. Here's Exodus 27. You were to construct the altar of acacia wood. The altar must be square, 7.5 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. It must be 4.5 feet high. Make horns for it on its four corners. The horns are to be of one piece. Overlay it with bronze. Make its pots for removing ashes and its shovels, basins, meat forks, and fire pans. Make all its utensils of bronze. Construct a grate for it of bronze mesh and make 4 bronze rings on the mesh at its four corners. Set it below under the altar's ledge so that the mesh comes halfway up the altar. All right, just so we're clear on what we're constructing here, this is describing kind of a grill, right? 7.5 feet, 7.5 feet. That's a massive grill. And it's 4.5 feet high. And then halfway through it, all right, so that's 2.25 feet off, I guess, the ground, is a mesh. So that as, you know, offerings are made on it, anybody out there, hardcore grill man or smoker, you know what happens, right? Stuff drips through. And that mesh is important. Have you noticed as well that the elements that are prescribed here are quite pragmatic? You've got even space for, you know, pots and for removing ashes, because this thing's going to be used. And you got to be able to remove those ashes. Modern day grills sometimes come with ash pans to be removed. Mine doesn't. I've got like a poor man's Traeger, a wood pellet grill, and I've just got to use a shop vac every month or two. It's got, you know, shovels, basins, meat forks, fire pans, all of its utensils. Everything's made of bronze, so it's high quality. It's higher quality than my grill that I got from Lowe's. And the grate makes perfect sense. And this is all designed for repeated use. There's something to that. The author of Hebrews would talk about how even the Day of Atonement would have to be done once a year. And the fact that he'd have to come back again means that the previous year's offering is no longer sufficient. And so the fact that we've got a grate and we've got, you know, basins and pans to remove ashes, and that it's designed to be portable, means that you're going to have to keep on doing this over and over again. And that reiteration of an atonement indicates evidently that the previous atonements were insufficient to atone for future sins. This is one of the ways in which the book of Hebrews points to the finality of Christ's work on the cross is sufficient, because not only did he not have to atone for his own sin the way that every priest did, but he does it once and for all. So there were no redundancies at the cross. All right, it was not designed, it was one use only. Whereas this thing is designed for repeated use over time. Now, there are poles for the altar of acacia wood, and they're overlaid with bronze as well. Why? Because they're going to be on the move. Verse 7, the poles are to be inserted into the ring so that the poles are on 2 sides of the altar when it's carried. Construct the altar with boards so that it is hollow. They are to make it just as it was shown to you on the mountain. This thing is a big, giant 7.5 feet by 7.5 feet by 4.5 feet wood smoker. And you've seen these horns mentioned before. If you've been faithfully just staying up to speed with your devotions, you know that if someone committed manslaughter but may have been accused of murder, and we don't yet live in the promised land in this point in Israel's history, so they can't yet go to the cities of refuge, they would run to the altar. And in fact, there would be one man who would do that under Solomon's reign. Was Adonijah, would run and grab the horns of the altar so that he could be atoned for, or that he could basically be heard out and not be wrongfully accused of murder. So those horns are going to come up. There were other altars and other religions as well that also had horns on them. Yeah, this one is one solid piece. That's just wise construction right there, because your grill, your smoker, and I imagine as well, your altar is going to go through some abuse. So it's got to be tough. Verse 9. Now we're going to see the design for this giant courtyard. You were to make the courtyard for the tabernacle. Okay, now remember, when you see courtyard, don't think one particular plot of land. The tabernacle moves around. And so the ground beneath this outlined area, what is it, 150 feet by 75 feet? It's going to be different ground every time they move it. Make hangings for the south side of the courtyard out of finely spun linen, 150 feet long on that side, including 20 posts and 20 bronze bases with silver hooks and silver bands for the posts. This must have been an exquisitely beautiful courtyard to see. And so make hangings 150 feet long for the north side, including 20 posts and their 20 bronze bases with silver hooks and silver bands for the posts. For the width of the courtyard, make hangings 75 feet long for the west side, including their 10 posts and their 10 bases. And for the width of the courtyard on the east side toward the sunrise, 75 feet, make hangings 22.5 feet long for one side of the gate, including their 3 posts and their 3 bases, and make hangings 22.5 feet long for the other side, including their 3 posts and their 3 bases. The gate of the courtyard is to have a 30-foot screen embroidered with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely spun linen. It is to have 4 posts and their 4 bases. All right, so you can add all of these dimensions up, and you can see how these things together, 22.5 feet, 22.5 feet, 30 feet. All right. And he's going to sum up all the dimensions right here. All the posts around the courtyard are to be banded with silver and have silver hooks and bronze bases. The courtyard is to be 150 feet long and 75 feet wide at each end and 7.5 feet high. So imagine that, 150 feet long, 75 feet wide. And you can also see how we gave specs for an entryway. And these embroideries, these banners that would hang along the multiple posts would be 7.5 feet high. All of it made of finely spun linen. The bases of the posts are to be bronze. And all the utensils of the tabernacle for every use and all its tent pegs, as well as the tent pegs of the courtyard, are to be made of bronze. That's a serious tent peg. A bronze tent peg. That thing's not going anywhere. So they lived a little bit like Bedouins, but probably better off than people like JL. Now, we've seen the altar. We've seen now the courtyard with these exquisite linen hangings, 150 feet by 75 feet, 7.5 feet high. That's a lot of square footage, isn't it? Somebody calculate that real quick. The total square footage. Don't forget to account for the entryway. And let us know what that is. And consider now how obsolete all of it is. Because what was the purpose of it? It was to say, that's the outside, this is the inside. As long as you're inside here, you're in the tabernacle. And if you're not on the inside of these hangings, these fine linen hangings suspended with bronze fixtures, then you're not in the tabernacle. Okay, that'll make sense. I'll elaborate on that more at the end, but there's a boundary here for a reason, to set aside this is a unique place. Now, verses 20 and 21 give an assignment that's no small task. You are to command the Israelites to bring you pure oil from crushed olives for the light in order to keep the lamp burning regularly. In the tent of meeting outside the curtain that is in front of the testimony, Aaron and his sons are to tend the lamp from evening until morning before the Lord. This is to be a permanent statute for the Israelites throughout their generations. When we roasted a pig at my house just a few days ago, it took 8 bags of charcoal and almost like half a cord of wood to keep it going, because we had surprise rainy weather here near Seattle. It was in the 40s all night long. Fortunately, it cleared up a bit for us when the men actually started arriving. We had a huge crowd of men. They covered all the asphalt on my property, which is a lot, and then all along Tiger Mountain Road. And it was an absolute blast. But wow, it took a lot of work. I had one of our Yetis come with his kid, and they helped me with my kids, build this cinder block oven as per the instructions given to me by, not by God on Mount Sinai, but by a nice Cuban man when I lived in Central Florida. And we made this clasp that's not so different from the mesh that's prescribed for the altar here. Mine was not made out of bronze. That would have been bad to the bone. My mesh was made out of stainless steel and rebar. And so it's this clamp. And you take the pig and you splay it out. Okay, you gotta kind of make his arms go akimbo and then place him within the clamp. And then it opens and closes like a book. And if that book spine, if you will, stays toward the coals, then you never drop piggy into the coals. Now we had to add that indirect heat element of a wood fire alongside it just to accommodate the rain and the weather. This was the hardest time I've ever had keeping a pig cooking all night long, just because it was 40 degrees and it was rainy. It was a hard work. But I'd go in and I had my kids on shifts and I'd come in and wake them up and be like, hey, time to go flip the pig. And they come out with me and we flip the pig and tend to the coals. And then on Sunday morning, we started this whole thing Saturday at 7 p.m. And the pig roast was at, the men were going to arrive at 6 p.m. on Sunday. And so, keeping my meat thermometer in the pig and watching it and praying a lot, the temperature would go up, to a fully cooked 160 at least. We had to keep that fire going. And so while I was preaching at the Redemption Church, my father-in-law, who's also a pastor, Pastor Brian Knott, mentioned this text, keeping the light burning. And he would come out and he would add wood to the wood fire on the indirect heat and coal to the charcoal bed directly under the pig to keep the light going, to keep it burning. Did you notice what the whole fixture was referred to as here? All right, we've got the altar in the opening verses. We've got the courtyard in the middle. And then there's this element of the lampstand oil to keep the lamps burning regularly. In verse 21, here's the big reveal in the tent of meeting. Outside the curtain that is in front of the testimony, Aaron and his sons are to tend the lamp from evening until morning before the Lord. This is to be a permanent statute for the Israelites throughout their generations. This is nothing short of the place where God would come and meet with his people. So it was a lot of work. They had to operate in shifts too, to keep that lamp burning too. And this was all for a good cause. For us, it was for a gathering of the men of the Redemption Church. By the way, the ladies had an incredible time at Bunko. Okay, they had their own thing, but this was the men's event. And it was for a great cause. I'd do it all again. I'm still trying to catch up on sleep. But it was worth it all to keep the fire going for the cause of, for us, just New Testament fellowship. But for Aaron and his sons, it was Old Testament worship. This was the tent of meeting. This was where God came to reveal his will to his people. Ask Aaron and his sons, was it worth the loss of sleep? Absolutely. Absolutely, it was worth the loss of sleep to be on rotation generationally, keeping those lampstands burning, because this is where God comes to meet with his people. There's not a more important spot in the world. This was more important. This tent was more important than the palace of Pharaoh, because the presence of the Lord wasn't there. It was here. And those curtains were important. I'll bet that embroidery work was absolutely exquisite. The fine linen that made the 150 feet by 75 feet, 7.5 feet tall, all the way around the courtyard. I'll bet that it was incredible, because they understood this separates the inside from the outside. This is the place where the tent of meeting goes, and this is where God comes to meet with his people. They take this incredibly seriously, and you ought to take the New Testament church seriously. We no longer need these Old Testament tools because the Spirit of God now dwells within each of us. But isn't that significant when a bunch of people who are filled with the Spirit of God all come together and their lamps combine and burn more brightly and eliminate the darkness that surrounds us, especially here near Seattle? So keep the lamp burning. Do not give up regular fellowship with the church. Many people are in the habit of doing this. It's even in the book of Hebrews. I encourage you all the more as the day of the Lord approaches to not give up meeting together, to come to the tent of meeting, to keep the lamp burning, because there's nothing more important than the will of God in our lives.